Were you, like, swapping advice? Were you
talking
about things?
Oh, so, I mean, I didn't have sex till I was 20, so there was
Yeah.
no advice to swap.
No, but...
Until I was, like, 20. But, like, oh, you mean, like, hypothetical advice?
Yeah.
Like, they're, like, in TV shows, they're like, well, you gotta put the balls in. Like, I think that's the in-betweeners. That's... a bad idea.
Got it.
It was,
What are you doing if you haven't?
I'm Josie Herbert, and this is Cumming of Age. And this week we are talking about misunderstandings. This week we have stories about friends, family, church, the internet, people who are telling us the wrong thing, and not having the faculties to fact check them. We're talking about miscommunications and misunderstandings about sex ed, and partnered sex, and masturbation, and bodies, and all of the myths that can be easier to find than the truth is, especially for kids.
I remember I was like 11, and I got the words orgy and orgasm like mixed up, which is weird because I feel like even from when I was very young, like my parents like told me like the basics of like reproduction anyway, like sperm goes into an egg and makes a baby via the genitals. But like, especially when I was like super little, I thought it was like pollination. Like I thought it was just like spores came out of your penis, and like if you were close to somebody for like a long period of time, they would get pregnant.
I think I thought a similar thing.
Which is like also like I was really into fungi when I was a kid, which is like a weird thing to say, but like I wanted to be like a mycologist and everything, and I was like, oh, okay, I know how mushrooms reproduce. That's like pretty similar.
Yeah, we're very similar to mushrooms.
I mean, even like a penis kind of looks like a mushroom.
Sure.
Am I wrong? Like, yeah.
So it's probably like, it's like the gills, right?
Right, yeah. I didn't really get that. But like, if you're like close to somebody, if you like someone a lot, you're like next to them a lot, and so therefore your spores like travel into the uterus somehow.
When did you learn what sex was?
I don't know. I remember my parents did give me the talk.
Really?
Yeah.
When?
I don't know. I think it was sometime around that time. I can't remember if it was before or after.
What was their
I think
talk?
It was before.
What did the talk consist of?
I think they got like a large book. Like I think it might have been like an eyewitness book. Were there eyewitness books at the time?
Definitely there were eyewitness books.
Because they had the eyewitness documentaries about the planets and the rainforest and trees and Pluto and all that and dinosaurs.
Trees.
Dinosaurs, not dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
I think they got like an eyewitness. It was like a big white
moth.
encyclopedia type book. It wasn't thick. It was very thin. It had a lot of pictures, and it had something to do with anatomy. And they're like, "Oh, look, anatomy." And they're like, "This is what." I think it was something along the line of, "This is how babies reproduce. This is what sex is." I can't remember it super clearly, but I remember they had a large book that was like an encyclopedia, and they said, "Book." They didn't say book. And they like showed me like, this is the male reproductive system. This is the female reproductive system. And people have sex. And sperm go out into the egg. And then they make babies. And then a baby grows. And it was something along those lines. I can't really remember super clearly. I do remember them saying, like, I don't know, you'll probably hear your people at school talking about this, and they'll say things about sex, and it'll be confusing, and they probably don't understand it any more than you do. And they'll probably say a lot of things that aren't true that'll confuse you, and that won't make a lot of sense. And then they said, so we want to clear it up before that happens. And they showed me the book, and they said, this is what happens. That's all I remember. I'm sure there was other stuff as well, but that's all I can remember. And I was like, all right. Okay. Felt a bit strange.
Were you, like, curious about that afterward? Did you still have lots of questions that went unanswered, or were you just kind of like, okay, whatever, back to my trains?
I think it was, like, more like, okay, whatever. Back to my so-and-so.
Yeah.
I wasn't like, I've never really talked to my parents about sex before.
Yeah.
This is one of the few occasions where I have.
I feel like we both had that book, like the American Girl doll book. It wasn't a doll.
It doesn't talk about
it doesn't talk
rubbing
about
your clit.
masturbation. It doesn't have the word clit in it, I don't think, which is, you know.
Crazy.
kind of
Maybe
a red
on like a
flag.
diagram it's labeled.
I don't even think in a diagram. I really feel like I would have, because I remember I had that book. Obviously, I studied it religiously
Yeah.
because I'm very gay and, you know, just interested. And there's boobs in it, and you see
Spent hours staring at those boobs.
Oh my god. Did you see the TikTok that was like, I finally have stage 5 titties? And I'm like,
No, but I love it.
I
don't even have
I
that.
have stage 3 titties.
Yeah.
That was upsetting to find because, yeah, I do feel like they set me up to fail in terms of the stages of titties.
Absolutely.
Really upsetting.
Never made it far. But then in freshman year, we had a health class and we did talk about sex. It felt more like a spectacle, honestly. Like, my teacher did a day where he just like let everyone ask questions because he did like his basic lecture, which I don't really remember. But I remember him letting us ask questions like anonymously. And it was almost like a joke. Like, it was like, I felt like I couldn't ask a real question because he would almost like laugh and like make a joke of the questions that were asked. Like, I know some of them were like, can I get pregnant from anal? And questions like that children would have. Like, children who have not had sex, like even children who have had sex that just don't know. Like, we were children who did not know how it worked. All we knew was from like watching porn. I'm sure that's all I had learned and like Googling things. So yeah, I remember like me and my friends, like I didn't ask a serious question because I felt like he went for the ones that sounded the silliest, that he could make a joke out of more. And he like left the serious ones like in his envelope and didn't want to answer those. I don't know. It was strange, but that is literally it. And like, oh, they have like the slideshow of the worst STDs they could imagine, you know, the ones that have been like progressing for years and years, and
I love
just
that.
the horrible, like, looks like somebody's been massacred pictures. Those were shown.
And did it make you not want to have sex with people?
I still had sex as a child. Absolutely not. I think
Weird.
everyone in the room wanted to have sex.
So it's crazy that looking at something that kind of has no context and trying to be scared out of your horniness as an actual adolescent, I cannot believe that didn't prevent you from starting your sexual activity.
I'm super deviant.
I don't know if I told you the way that sex was explained to me for the first time.
Mm.
It was explained wrong. Well, the first time after I forgot what they said in 5th grade, presumably, my mother explains to me that you take the penis, I don't even know if she mentioned erections, and you put it in like this, you know how women have a space between, she said. And I thought to myself, well, what is a space between that women have that men don't? And I was like, oh, cleavage. I thought you got pregnant through your cleavage for a split second before my mom looked at the confusion on my face and was like, do you know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah. And then she's like, between the legs. And I was like, oh. And this was like 7th grade probably. So I was not a studly kid. I wasn't terribly interested in relationships as a child. So I thought to myself, oh yeah, women don't have penises. It reminded me of this fact. I hadn't really considered it in 7th fucking grade.
Why would you need to?
So I was like 13 years old and I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember being told that women have like a hole or something. I didn't know. Something like that. And
At least one.
And so she follows up with, and that's where you, like, you know, you put the stuff. I don't know what the phrasing was. It was probably something less, like, childish than that. So I was under the impression that you peed in between their legs from far away.
I didn't even know that there was a hole. I was just
Really?
like, I really didn't. And I don't know how I
That's
missed
something
that.
I've always been curious about. Like, so when you're a girl, like, do you not know what a vagina looks like? Like, is it not possible to see?
I could see it with effort.
Okay.
If I put any effort, I mean, I could do it.
Okay.
But it's not as intuitive.
Sure.
And you're not necessarily encouraged to be like, poke around out there, see what's going on. Which of course lots of people do anyway. But no, I remember, and like I did know like the biology of pregnancy and birth more than I knew the biology and mechanics of vaginal intercourse. So I knew that there was a hole, but I didn't really put it together that things went in. I don't know.
Hey,
but then I
these new
remember
things came out.
realizing like, oh shit, that's there. Crazy.
How strange.
Yeah. Which is a weird moment when you're like...
Yeah, that would be quite a thing to interface with.
Yeah. It's fun. Growing up's fun.
Like, I knew implicitly that male sexual pleasure was mostly friction-based, but I had no idea what the fuck anything was.
I just like that mostly friction-based.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that doesn't actually cover the gamut of experience, but that it is at least you get what I mean. The point is, I had touched my penis before, and I knew how that worked, but nobody told me how vaginas worked, so I assumed it was the same.
Just the mechanics.
Yeah, but they don't have the same shape, so it's definitely not the same.
No. No, and you'd think perhaps as an inverse, which it isn't, maybe it would work the same, which it doesn't.
No.
I don't know if he was ashamed or nervous or what, but I went and bought condoms.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
I was very nervous. I felt like, I think I had to ask, and I went to Kroger, and I asked someone like where the condoms were, and it was like an older lady, and I felt really ashamed. And she like brought me, she was like, they're right here, and I like hid them. I was scared I was gonna run into someone I knew. I was like hiding them in my basket, and like I went to self-checkout. It was a whole thing.
Wow.
But I wanted to
you
fuck.
asked.
I would have done anything.
Guess I'm not a virgin anymore. It didn't feel like anything had changed because the sex was so unremarkable. But yeah, there wasn't much. It was sort of sour, but it wasn't like depressing or scary or traumatizing. It was just sort of sour. Then eventually I orgasmed. I'm pretty sure it didn't happen quickly because I've never had an easy time orgasming quickly. But it definitely wasn't like I was performing well. Having endurance is not enough to perform well sexually as a dude.
Perhaps
yeah, definitely
loosely related, but
Yeah.
certainly not.
Yeah, certainly not. Is necessary, but not sufficient.
No.
Yeah. So if I try to list them, I'm gonna like miss some, and somebody's gonna be like, "Wow, that guy doesn't even know about such and such. Oh, but he's terrible."
You don't have to worry about that because no one listens to this.
Oh, thank God.
When you exclusively consume media that is a performance of sexuality that does not necessarily feel authentic to your expression of sexuality, it can create lots of expectations that your sex is going to look a certain way, or that you're supposed to be satisfied with a certain type of sex. And even when you are satisfied without sex, or without certain types of sex that in our society we prize above others, it can still leave you feeling inadequate because you've been told your whole life that this is the end-all and be-all. Whether it's penis and vagina sex, or an orgasm at the end of sex, or an orgasm through penis and vagina sex, or having sex with lots of partners, or only having sex with one partner your whole life. All of these expectations are part of a construction that sexuality should only look one way, when we just know that not only is that not true, it's super boring.
And so it's nice sort of in this season to like be like, oh, actually, like I can have a really vivid experience by myself, and then I'm starting to strip away the sort of beta male narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like this is because I'm like not a like jacked up alpha, who has like a harem of women, but that's like a real like it's so like cartoony and ridiculous, but it's like totally like real in its kind of heft in my mind, and I think a lot of like, I don't know.
That narrative is deeply ingrained, even if it's not explicitly said. Yeah.
So
realizing that you
just-
can have like a really fulfilling sex
Yeah.
life with or without a partner.
which I like really would prefer to be with a partner, but it's still it's still like, good sex with myself is still way better than like not great sex with a partner. So it's like just the sort of baseline of like whether people are willing to have sex with you, that is like an affirmation of your like value as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
which is like totally like a super prevalent narrative through my whole life, knowing what sex was.
No, but that's interesting that you say that, because we talk a lot about like emphasis of like desirability indicating your value as a person.
Right.
And I certainly feel like we talk about that with women, but not as much with
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
Which is
That's true.
interesting.
That's true. Yeah.
Because that's so connected to like your body image and your self-esteem about what you look like with women. So like in like body positivity movements, we could talk about that, but those aren't the kinds of conversations I've been having about that. So that's interesting that you bring that up, because we definitely do like, you're a good man if you are having a lot of sex with lots of women, which is almost obviously like contradictory to how we think of what a good woman is doing, but that's a separate matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, honestly, I don't really care that much. I feel like also like orgasms in general are kind of superfluous to sex. You know what I mean? Like, it's nice if it happens. It's great, but like at the end of the day, I feel like it's not necessarily the end goal. It's like, okay, this is an expression of intimacy. It's making us both feel good. If one of us has an orgasm, great. If not, that's not necessarily like the end all be all of all sexual relations.
I mean, I feel like in my experience, like the relationships the sexual relationships I was having that were like more long-term and more communicative and more about the relationship that I had with the person were like, I learned so much more about myself and like my body, and like I would say I learned more about like what pleasure meant to me like in those relationships than I did by having an orgasm. Like when I didn't even like say anything to the guy afterwards, so I'm not gonna be like, oh my gosh, you just gave me my first orgasm since the last 5 years or whatever. Like, I'm not gonna say that to this like random person. So I was like, oh, that moment has passed now. Like, it's just, you're right. We hype it up so much, but like that's not like really what it's about.
We want sex to be gendered in those ways. Like, we want to keep it gendered throughout the whole process. So it's like types of people you're attracted to, types of people you have sex with, the types of sex you have. Like, we want all of those to fit into neat gender categories. And so the way you're sexually oriented is a perfect description of that, and a perfect description of the way that sex is framed to be dysfunctional kind of in our society. And so like, we'll talk about that, but what we don't talk about is like the types of sexual pleasure people have, the inconvenient ways that sexual pleasure manifests or doesn't manifest. Like, the whole conception of this podcast is like, what is the first time you experience this like paramount of pleasure that we have this narrative around culturally, that is like this absolute cultural ideal of sexuality and kind of the end all be all of all sexuality, which is something that I kind of think about when I do do like an elevator pitch of the whole project. It's like, who even gives a shit when your first orgasm was? Like, it kind of doesn't matter. And that's something kind of weird to be admitting internally. Like, I still think it's important and I'm still glad to be doing it, but it's kind of like there are lots of other interesting things to talk about. So that's it for our Cincinnati series. I want to thank Timothy Fox for composing our original music, as well as all of my participants in this series. Hopefully we will be able to make another series sooner than 2 years from now, and the way you can ensure that is by checking out the Patreon, patreon.com/comingofage, and consider supporting us. I really do enjoy this work, and I would love to be able to devote more time to it so that it comes out more frequently than every 2 years. Thank you so much for listening. I can't believe you made it this far. I'm about to graduate. This is actually my senior capstone project, so this has been a weird project to work on this semester because I have not been in classrooms because COVID. If you have a story you'd like to share, or you just want to say hi, you can reach me on Twitter at Cumming of Age Pod. You can go to my website, josieherbert.com, and submit a story, and you can email me at comingofagepod@gmail.com.
My mom, when she would wake up my brothers and I, like before school in the mornings, like elementary school, she would say, "Wakey, wakey, hands off snakey." Like, to stop touching your dick.